Hello, my name is Nikodimov. I am a staff technical product manager in the VMware Cloud Provider platform unit responsible for VCD networking. In this demo of a series that I'm doing for VCD 10.5 new IP spaces features, I want to show you how a provider gateway that is using legacy IP blocks can be migrated seamlessly and securely to IP spaces without any data plane traffic disruption. So before jumping to the lab, let me explain you my lab topology. I have two tenants, Alpha and Bravo. Each tenant has a single org. Both tenants have an Internet Edge gateway that is connected to a shared provider gateway, which is using IP blocks. Each of these edge gateways has a routed network created, production for Alpha, development for Bravo, and the traffic from these networks before reaching the public provider gateway is source netted on the edge gateway. Here to .3 for tenant Bravo to .30. From the public provider gateway, there is a BGP session with the top of the rack router that I'm using, which is a virtual VIOS router to kind of connect to the environment and to provide internet access for the environment as well. Tenant Bravo also have two isolated networks, and these isolated networks, as you can see, are using one and the same subnet, was in the same CIDR block, and there is a reason for that because we want to explore some nice verifications that the migration wizard will provide. On tenant Alpha, I also have a separate edge gateway connected to a private provider gateway. Because I want route advertisement to be enabled for this edge gateway, and because this private gateway is also using legacy IP blocks, actually this private gateway has to be dedicated to the edge gateway. So with IP blocks on the provider gateway, I can have just a single edge gateway connected to, which is one of the limitations that IP spaces solves. So currently I have this DR network that is route advertised natively to the private provider gateway. From this private provider gateway, again, there is a BGP session with the top of the rack router to basically provide connectivity for the DR network. And I'm using this job station, which is a Windows server, to kind of connect to the environment and to do configuration and verifications. So now let's jump to the lab topology and start exploring IP space migrations. All right, I'm connected to the lab environment, and before to start with the configurations, let's do some verifications. So on this top of the rack router, I'm receiving a host route for the source NAT IP address of tenant alpha.3 for tenant bravo.30, and there is also this /24 IP prefix that I'm receiving for the DR network on tenant alpha. So actually all my virtual machines, the production one for tenant alpha, the development one from tenant bravo, are able to ping this jump box, which is outside of the VCD and the NSX environment 10.10. And also from the jump box, I'm able to ping the DR virtual machine, which has an IP address of 100.2. So there is a connectivity for all networks and all virtual machines right now. So let's start with the migration steps and go to the provider gateway. The first gateway that I want to migrate is this shared public internet provider gateway. In 10.5 we have this IP space migration prep link that you can click, and the first step actually before the migration is to assign an IP space uplink. So the IP space has to be created first. I have the IP space pre-created already that I want to use, this public one. And in this IP space, I have the service scope, the internal scope of this /22 network. And also I have some IP ranges and some IP prefixes. So actually what the provider has to do before the migration to create an IP space and the internal scope, to create an internal scope for this IP space that includes all the IP ranges that currently are being used by the edge gateways. So if I go to the edge gateway, and let's first check the Internet Alpha one. This one has a IP range allocation of this one. And then on the Bravo, there is another IP allocation of this one. So first, the internal scope has to include both, and also the IP ranges that are created here have to include all these IP ranges currently existing on the edge gateways. From IP prefixes perspective, I don't have any problem currently with this provider gateway because this is a shared provider gateway, so there is no natively routed network, so those prefixes are not being used. So let's actually go and attach and create an uplink, and let's see what the migration will do. SP1, let's attach this public IP space. As you can see here, I don't know if you paid attention, but when I was listing the IP spaces, there was additionally 2 private IP spaces, but you cannot see them here because a private IP space cannot be attached to a public provider gateway. So let's attach this one. Let's associate all interfaces of this provider gateway, which is another new feature in VCD 10.5 to provide granularity of tier 0 gateway interface to uplink mapping, which is related to the default NAT and firewall configuration on a private active standby provider gateway. And let's finish this step. So after the uplink is created, we can actually start the migration process. So let's start the migration. Here we have some information, preliminary information, which basically says what I already explained, that an IP space has to be created with the necessary internal scope, IP blocks, and IP prefixes to match the current IP range information that the different edge gateways connected to this provider gateway are utilizing. And also, if the route advertisement of this IP space is enabled, there is this notification that manipulation of the edge of the route advertisement of the edge gateway is going to be enabled. In general, the migration process from IP blocks to IP spaces is just a database manipulation. We don't expect to have any data plane disruption. So if I click next, I will see that there are some violations here that I'm having. And of course, this is intentionally done by me just to show you the checks that the migration wizard will do. So currently, there is a violation that some of these IP addresses are not included in the IP ranges of the IP space for both tenant alpha and Bravo, which is something I have to fix before to proceed with the migration. I don't have any network subnet violation because I don't have natively routed networks currently for this for this provider gateway. And if I click next, of course, I cannot proceed with the migration because first I have to fix the problems. So let me cancel this and fix the problems that I have. So the first thing that I want to do is to fix maybe tenant Bravo by just, let me again check what was here the IP range that was used from 21 to 30. So here I have to fix that to 30. And let me save that. I'm not going to touch the range here for tenant alpha because what I want to show you is that you can fix the problem in another way depending how many IP addresses are currently being used. So I can go on the edge gateway and tenant alpha and to the IP allocations. And because I'm not using all the IP addresses that this range provide, actually I can change and shrink this IP range to just to match the IP addresses that I'm using. So let's shrink it to 5. And let's hope that this is going to fix the problem for tenant alpha. So let me go back and let me again try to do the migration. So let me click migrate and see if, of course, there is no violation currently for IP pools because I fixed both of the problems. I don't have any violation from subnet perspectives. And if I click next, there is this node that I'm receiving. I can proceed with the migration, but the migration wizard is notifying me that there was a routed network with a CIDR block that was discovered attached to one of the gateways that is connected to this provider gateway for tenant Bravo, which has a match with an internal scope of a private type space. This private type space I mentioned already that cannot be attached to the shared public provider gateway. But what this note is saying that after we do the migration, a single edit of this network will actually trigger this network to be managed by this private IP space. So let's proceed with the migration here. And while I'm doing this migration, let me actually start watching the virtual machines. And as I expecting during the migration is going to be fast, but during this migration, there is not going to be any data plane traffic disruption here. So both of the production and the development virtual machines that are connected to those edge gateways, Internet one connected to the provider gateway that I'm migrating to IP spaces, are able to communicate. Okay, so let's see what we are having here on the IP space after the migration. We see that there is already some floating IP addresses utilizations. So if I go here, I can see some utilizations. Let me first check the quota. I can see that two custom quota were created for the exact number of floating IP addresses that each tenant has. I can also see the floating IP addresses here that are assigned for each tenant from provider perspective. There is no IP prefixes, of course, because no routed networks with public IP addresses are being used. From tenant perspective, if I go and click IP spaces, I can see here that there is some utilization, and I can check also the floating IP addresses which are being used and for what exactly reason those are being used, which is very good information here that we are receiving. So now, and the same applies for tenant basically Bravo, that we can see that the information for floating IP addresses which are being used, which are not being used. Actually, what I can also show you that after the migration, these edge gateways here do not have, and there is some small, I guess here, maybe a problem or bug, I don't know. But there is actually the IP management hyperlink does not exist here anymore. So, and this is because the and why let me just maybe click like this. So basically this does not exist. I guess that's a small problem with the UI that we still show the information, but maybe a total refresh of the window is going to fix that. This IP management link does not exist anymore because everything is being managed by the IP space itself. So after this actually migration, what I want to check what is going to happen if I create a two routed networks that I want those routed networks to be route advertised. And to do that, the first thing that I want to do is to go and to enable the route advertisement here for the IP space. And after this route advertisement is enabled, I can go to the tenant and I can create some networks. So let's do that. Routed network. I want this to be connected to the Internet Alpha, and now this is available. I can do the route advertisement for this edge gateway, although this edge gateway is connected to the shared public provider gateway, but now this provider gateway is using IP spaces, so I can do route advertisement. And also what I can do here, that I can automatically, as a tenant, request some networks. So let me request /26 for this tenant, network 1 for easy typing, and just click next and finished. So now this network that I'm receiving, I'm expecting that as soon as I have this network, I should see this network route advertised. This is 192.168.241.0, and I can see that I'm receiving this network right now. And this is because if I log into the, sorry, not this one. If I log to the, again, mistake. If I log to the NSXT manager and to the, let's go to networking, to tier 1 gateway and to the Internet Alpha. This route advertisement rule was created for this network additionally here that I want to be advertised. I can do the same thing for tenant Bravo. So I can create a new routed network, which again can be route advertised using the same shared public gateway. Let me request another, for instance, range here, /27. Next. And hopefully this /27 network will be route advertised, and I will receive a prefix here for it. Should be this one. Yeah. So again, the big benefit, one of the big benefits, of course, to use IP spaces for the provider gateway is that you can use a public provider gateway. You can share it with different tenants, or it could be a single tenant, but different edge gateways, and you can enable the route advertisement for networks. And as you can see that during the creation of the network, I can automatically request particular subnets or satellite blocks to be utilized. And if I go now to the IP space, let me actually show the tenant view first. You can see that actually this is not shown by default, but here I can see that there is a network that is being used. If I go to IP space again, I can enable also this column here that will show me also some utilization. And of course, from provider perspective, I can check the IP prefixes that are being assigned for the different tenants. Right, so the next thing that I want to do is to go to tenant Bravo and to see what's going to happen with those isolated. Actually, the first thing what I want to do is to edit this network, which is a network that was discovered in a private IP address internal scope. If you remember, there was this note at the end of the migration, before to start the migration, that this network has been discovered in this private IP address scope, so this one here, but has not been migrated to IP spaces because this was a private IP space. But if I edit this network here, let me actually first check that this network, I have this network in the scope, but what about here? I also have the network here. So this means that I can go and edit this network. Edit. Sorry, defnet. And hopefully this will make this network to be start managed by the private IP space. So if I go to IP spaces, to the private one, this disappear again, but let me, I can see some IP prefixes utilization, and here now I can see that this network is being managed by this private IP space. Another thing that I want to explore here is what going to happen with these isolated networks if I want to migrate them to be managed by IP spaces. So they are using some other scope, if I'm not mistaken, which I have to fix first in the IP space. So let me go to the definition and to add this scope, which is going to be 172.31.16.0.20. And also I have to add the range of the network that was 172.31, if I'm not mistaken, .20/24, and save. Okay, let me go back to the network and let me edit this network. So this is ISO net1. And save it. So if I go back to IP space, the private one, I hope that this network is here. Yeah, this one is now managed by this IP space. But what's going to happen if I try to do and edit the second one, which is using the same CIDR block? The same CIDR block has been defined. So here, if I go edit to save. Okay, this is what I expected. I'm receiving an error that I'm trying actually to migrate this network into IP spaces that already is having such prefix that was assigned. So I cannot actually migrate this network into the IP space. Okay. The last thing that I want to show is to go back to tenant alpha and to do a migration for the private gateway that is being utilized by an edge gateway of this tenant alpha. So this is this DR services that currently is a dedicated gateway for the DR services alpha edge gateway, because the route advertisement is enabled. If I go here to route advertisement, we see that it is enabled, and we already checked that there is a connectivity. So let me go to this provider gateway, and if I'm not mistaken, I already created the uplink with this private IP address scope. This is a private gateway, so that's why I can attach a private IP space as an uplink. And if I start the migration process, I am not going to have any violation here because there is no services, not or load balancing or layer 2 VPN. But here on the subnets, I'm going to receive some violations, and they are for one and the same network, basically. So the first violation, of course, says that there is not an IP prefix that was created in this IP space to match the network itself, which is something kind of expected. But the second one is telling us that also this the route advertisement for this private IP space has not been enabled. And I already showed you that this network is currently natively route advertised by the edge gateway. So The migration tool also ensures that you won't be able to migrate this network until you enable the router advertisement. So the migration tool ensures that, again, there is not going to be any traffic disruption. So let me go back and fix those two errors quickly. To the IPs, not this one, the alpha. First to the general to fix the prefix itself. Let me see the scope. I think I have the scope, so I just have to add the prefix, which is 10.100.100.024. And the other problem that has to be fixed is to enable the route advertisement for this network from the network topology. Okay, as soon as I do that, I should be able to migrate this private gateway. So let's start the migration again. No static IP pool violation and no subnets violation. So I can safely basically migrate this private provider gateway to IP spaces. Let me first check if everything is okay. So I'm able to ping this virtual machine still. And let's finish the migration from here. And while the migration is going, let's see if there is going to be any problem here, but I don't think so. The migration is done and I am still being able to ping this virtual machine from the outside. So if I go to IP spaces now and to the private alpha IP space, I should see this prefix here managed by the IP space itself. And from tenant alpha perspective, I can click and I can see that this prefix is being used and for which exactly network this prefix is being used. So this concludes the IP space migration demo. Thank you for watching.